Vikings, eh? Bloodthirsty, vicious barbarians, well known for their willingness to loot monasteries and murder their enemies in a variety of gruesome ways, including perhaps the grisliest end you could imagine, the blóðőrn, or more commonly known as the Blood Eagle. Reserved only for the worst of the worst in Viking eyes, people who had lost their honor through acts of cowardice, or who had killed one of their family members. It was a horrifying torture method that struck fear into the hearts of anybody listening to the Orkneyinga Saga or the tale of Ragnar's sons or any of the other tales told around the fire on a cold winter's evening. While this would make for a delightfully grim way to confirm that Vikings were all bearded, terrifying mercenaries who'd kill you as soon as they look at you, as always with history, the truth is far more nuanced, and that's what we want to explore in this video. Just as a fair warning, this video is pretty gruesome. Enjoy! Welcome to the Viking Vault. The method. Before we get into the discussion around the blóðőrn, let's look at what the victim of the Blood Eagle is said to have endured. During this particularly gross torture method, the unfortunate victim would have their lungs pulled through their back to create a pair of bloody, beating wings, all while they are still alive. It seems too incredible to be true and would have required a steady hand and strong stomach from the torturer. Firstly, the victim's hands and legs would be tied together to stop them from moving while the torturer got to work. The victim would also be placed face down to allow easy access to their spine. Next, their back would be sliced open along their spine from their tailbone all the way to the top of their ribcage. Once the ribcage is on display, each rib would be separated from the spine with an axe, giving you easy access to all the internal organs that are now slightly more external organs. The final step would be to reach in and pull out the lungs and lay them out on the victim's back. Unsurprisingly, the likelihood of surviving this method of torture was incredibly slim, with the victim likely to die pretty quickly either from blood loss, shock, or suffocation as their lungs are removed and generally manhandled. Just bad press and gory stories? The Viking Blood Eagle is so deeply linked to the Vikings in general that it might actually surprise you that there is very little evidence for this ever actually happening. Violence was commonplace in the medieval period, but that's not the whole story. And one of the things we need to talk about is who is actually writing the stories about the Blood Eagle. A lot of the Viking culture was transmitted orally. Runes didn't really lend themselves to writing fairy tales or instructions for how to brutally murder someone. That means that a lot of what we have to look at when talking about this period in time was written down by Christians after the fact. Occasionally, as much as centuries after the events that took place in the sagas and poems from the Viking period. So, when it comes down to it, there really are only a handful of explicit references to the Blood Eagle in the sagas, poems, and prose that survive to this day, perhaps as few as 9. Even among these references in Norse text, there isn't any real consensus as to what the Blood Eagle was, with most of them referring to it as, quote, carving, cutting, marking a blood eagle. There's a single Latin source that refers to the blood eagle called the Gesta Danorum, which talks about how the Vikings, quote, commanded that the likeness of an eagle should be put onto his back. See, this doesn't really indicate ribcages being cracked open. All the sources refer to the blood eagle in some way, but each account varies in what actually happened. 3 out of the 8 Norse sources only say that the victim died shortly after getting the eagle cut into his back, without giving any further anatomical details. The first is when Einar killed Halfdan Longleg in the late 9th century, and the other is when Ivar the Boneless kills King Eyleof Northumbria. There is also an oblique reference to the Blood Eagle in the story of Norna Jest, where a character describes what happened before. So let's take a closer look at what was actually said in each of these sagas before looking at the debate around the Blood Eagle and the fact that some modern research doesn't exactly rule out the possibility that this particularly gruesome form of torture might have been performed in the Viking Age. First, the Orkneyinga Saga. Written in the late 12th century by some unnamed Icelandic scribe, this saga tells the tale of the first conquest of Orkney and the subsequent bloodshed and drama that followed. There's murder, mystery, a little bit of mysticism and magic, and a whole load of blood. In it, Viking leader and Earl of Orkney, Einar, is described as carving the blood eagle into the back of Halfdan Longlegs and dedicating his death to Odin. The story says that, quote, Earl Einar went to Halfdan and carved blood eagle on his back in this wise, that he thrust a sword into his trunk by the backbone and cut all the ribs away, from the backbone down to the loins, and drew the lungs out there. Now, why would Einar ever have wanted to kill Halfdan in such a gruesome way? Apparently, just general vengeance. One of the biggest issues that a lot of modern scholars have with the concept of the blood eagle is the lack of concrete evidence for it. If it were being used, surely there should be at least a few skeletons lying around with distinct damage to their ribs and spine to support this bloodthirsty way of killing people. It has also been argued that the blood eagle is simply a poetic metaphor that got way out of hand, or wing, and we've basically just been misunderstanding the equivalent of an Old Norse meme for well over a millennium. Old Norse poetry was incredibly complex, and skalds would use things called kennings as part of their poems to show off how good they were with words. If you think Shakespeare's complicated, he's got nothing on skalds. Kennings are like little riddles or metaphors that are made up of two parts and would have been well known as a sort of shorthand way of describing the same thing but in a different way. One of my favourites is the Whale Road, a kenning that refers to the sea. The reason that we're talking so much about old poetry is that this is one of the arguments that scholars have been making for quite a long time. A common trope in Old Norse literature is the beasts of battle, which were the wolf, the raven, and, you guessed it, the eagle. It's possible that when the Orkneyinga Saga talks about the blood eagle, it really just means that Einar killed Alia by stabbing him in the back. Humans are fascinated by gross things, and scholars are absolutely no exception. The blood eagle continues to intrigue scholars even to the present day, with one team of scholars looking into the nitty-gritty, fundamental physical possibility of whether the blood eagle would have even been possible to perform. In a study that came out in 2022 in the Speculum Journal, the researchers finally concluded that the full form of the blood eagle would have been possible. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Viking Vault. Please do subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying these videos, and let us know in the comments if there's anything you want us to cover. We'll be back next week for another video, and I hope you have a great week until then. Cheers!